I always knew there was something different about me, but I could never figure out what it was. Then I discovered I was gay, and I began to like myself. Then from somewhere, deep inside, I heard the calling to be a nun. Welcome. My name is Sister Who. With me on the show today, I have Miss Marky Woods, a transgender person. And you're going through the process. It's a very extended process, I understand. And I want to say from the beginning that I think the utmost respect is necessary. And I'm much more concerned with the spiritual and emotional aspects, and really don't want to get into any kind of petty obsession with the physical details, because in my understanding, that's really not what it's about anyway. I mean, it's kind of, but it kind of isn't. I mean, it's something that starts from inside of you. Am I describing this correctly?
Oh, exactly. What my journey is about is bringing my physiology in line with my spirituality.
It seems to me there must be, grantedly, a very difficult one, but an interesting insider perspective that could be offered. Someone who is spiritually and emotionally and internally a woman, finding herself trapped for all those years in a man's body. I recall, for example, a reporter who wanted to do a special article on aging. And so she put on different sorts of clothing and actually strapped different sorts of forms onto her body so that her movement duplicated that of elderly people. The problem she found when she got out is that because she was strapped into this, she couldn't move like a younger person and was suddenly vulnerable to all sorts of things that she wouldn't have been otherwise vulnerable to. In a similar sort of way, it seems to me someone who is a woman, I don't know, is trapped the right word? To say trapped in a man's body?
I think so, sure.
I mean, it gives you a way of looking at the experience that probably no man is ever going to realize. Things that you notice that men won't notice about being a man. In the same way that this reporter noticed things about being old that perhaps old people themselves don't even think about. I'm wondering if there's any insight, comparison, contrast that you might answer that with.
Oh, very much so. Male physiology has always felt extremely uncomfortable and unnatural for me. From my earliest recollections, I felt inherently female. And I was just thinking before the show about even when children are young, before puberty, our bodies aren't all that different other than the genitalia. Even then, I was quite aware that I wasn't in the right body, or the body that felt correct for me. And then when I went through puberty as a young teenager, it just exacerbated my feelings of being ill-suited to my physiology.
So it's very much a question of integrity,
Oh, very much.
you know, which to me integrity really doesn't have that much to do with physical form. It's more who you know yourself to be and to what extent you're able to present that to the world.
What that led to was, aside from having an extremely unhappy and troubled childhood, spending most of my time living a fantasy life. Every day of my life as a child, I would have fantasies about being female and what my life would be about as a female, who I would be associating with, what I would be wearing, how I would wear my hair. The minutest little details, I had them all worked out in my head. So in my real life, I was going through the motions, obviously, and living an entire fantasy life in my head the whole time. Suicide was a constant companion. Thoughts of suicide were a constant companion, not only through my childhood, but well into my adult years. What really started me on my journey through gender reassignment was I reached a point in my adult life where I was going to end my life if I didn't find a way to bring my physiology and my spirituality into line with one another.
In reflecting or pondering what goes on with suicide several months ago, it occurred to me that to be suicidal is to be in a place of radical disempowerment, to be facing something where you just don't feel like you have any resources to deal with it. And that the first thing to extend to someone in that situation is some sort of personal empowerment, some way of feeling good about themselves, some way of feeling that they actually have a future, some experience, not just a new perspective, not just a new attitude, but some experience that somehow validates that there is something to live for.
I found that after many, many years, what it was like for me was I picture a scale. And on one side of the scale are the things that are life-affirming and inspire me to feel joy at merely being alive. The other side of the scale are the things that make life very unpleasant, very hard to bear. And so many times in my life, that negative side got so heavy that I all but lost touch with what I call the beautiful bright white light. Somehow there was always, even if the tiniest little ray of that bright white light on my heart kept me moving forward, because for many, many months I had a plan to end my own life. And I kept...
Yes, you were telling me about this. It was actually a bit amusing.
Yeah.
I mean, not to make light of it, but go on.
I was going to do it on a Saturday night after I would have enjoyed one of my favorite meals and perhaps one of my favorite movies, and at the point at which I would have taken 1 or 2 sleeping pills, because at that time in my life I was badly addicted to sleeping pills. I wasn't able to sleep any other way. At that point, I was going to take the whole bottle of sleeping pills and just go to sleep and never wake up, because I was so removed from that light. And the tiniest little seemingly insignificant things would provoke me to put it off even one more week. Such things as, well, I have a lunch date with an old friend next week and I would like to see her once before I end my life, so I won't do it this week. Or there's a movie on TV next Wednesday night that I really want to see, and so I'm going to wait till then. And the reasons continued to manifest themselves until I no longer needed them.
Mhm.
And even though I still go to that dark place often, there's enough bright white light constantly shining on my heart that keeps me moving forward. There's
Well, you're in the process now of creating the life that you want to live.
very much, very much.
And that has got to be a wonderfully empowering thing to do. You know, and not to make light of the experience, I just find it amusing when you know, to think of someone being asked, so why didn't you get around to, why didn't you commit suicide? They say, well, I just never got around to it. I mean, it sounds like a very amusing sort of way to put it, but it is very important that that we're able to create the life worth living. And in that sense, how wonderful to be born into a time when there are the medical resources to actually take some action,
Oh, very
you know, around
much.
these sorts of issues.
I can't imagine what, you know, transgendered people did 100 years ago. I would imagine a great number of them ended their lives because there were no options. People who were fortunate enough to have a level of gender ambiguity where they could pass as one gender or the other, perhaps just lived in the role of the opposite gender. For me, that was one of the ironies of my situation, is that having felt inherently female all my life, when I went through puberty, my physiology became extremely masculine. I had hair growing out of all over my body, whiskers, real thick, heavy whiskers, which are still there, but definitely diminished as a result of the estrogen treatments that I've been on. So I'm definitely going through a physiological transition, and that brings great joy to me.
Kind of reminds me of that scene at the beginning of the movie Switch, in which just very, very briefly, a man has been cheating on 3 girlfriends. They decide to kill him. He gets sent to heaven, and he says, give me another chance. And they say, well, go back, and if you could find one woman who loves you, well, the devil intercedes and says, you've made it too easy, so they send him back as a woman. And he wakes up in the morning in a woman's body, still thinking he's a man, goes and walks past the mirror and just like, practically goes into absolute shock as he's looking into the mirror, seeing himself in this totally opposite body. And it's, you know, to think of that as being an ongoing thing, you know, and that for a lot of people, it's not just a plot in a movie, but there's a feeling of actually being in that position, of looking in the mirror and seeing the wrong thing.
Every minute of my life. And you know what that reminds me of? A couple of years ago, a children's movie was quite popular, Mulan. It was a cartoon about a young girl who goes to war, I guess, so that her father won't have to. In one scene that touched me very deeply, Mulan is looking into the water and seeing her reflection. And the song she's singing, she says, when will my reflection show who I am inside? And every time I look in the mirror, I feel that way. And as I go through my transition, I'm seeing more and more of the person I really am revealing herself in the mirror.
Which is wonderful joy.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten much into it yet, the deep psychological side of this. And there's one question I would like to interject at this point. It's the rude question I warned you about beforehand. From reading some things you'd written about your whole process, and without digressing into any discussion of the person who said it, just wanting to honestly address the question. You were accused of being a gay man who would not accept his gayness. And what I wondered as I was reading it is what is the distinction, how to identify whether you're dealing with a gay man who won't accept it, or how to identify whether you're dealing with a genuine transgender person. And I'm wondering, do you have any idea of what would be the difference between the two from your experience?
Well, and that's a good word. My experience is the only place from which I can come. I can share with you what it's been about for me. For 20 years, I tried to fit into the mold of a gay man because my sexual orientation is exclusively toward men. And I thought, well, I'm physiologically male and sexually aroused by males, so I must be a gay man. And it just, I had a few short-lived relationships with gay men in the 70s. And there was just something that wasn't there that I needed. It was a vacant experience. And it took me an additional 20 years to realize I'm not a gay man, I'm female.
It was like you could, I'm just suggesting here, like you could sense they were looking for something in you that you didn't have to give?
Very much, very much. As a matter of fact, what I found is that so many gay men are very turned off by a feminine male, which is basically what I was, in addition to being transgendered. And not even, I describe in one part of my manifesto that from my earliest recollections, looking around me, I felt a strong kinship with women, with female half of humanity.
But it was a kinship, not an attraction.
Oh, exactly, yeah. Those were the people who were like me. And males often felt like a different species altogether. And I've had gay men tell me that they had a similar experience. So that doesn't necessarily indicate that a person is transgendered. For me, it went so much farther than that. It was a constant aching in my soul that I am in the wrong body.
I'm curious how, well, the image that comes to mind is someone who's growing up who is going to be recognized in adulthood, perhaps, probably, hopefully, as a transgender person. Is there any way to know in the early ages, or how does anyone address this so that they have a less wounding childhood?
You know, that's going to take probably another century or so of spiritual evolvement of our culture. We live in a culture that is profoundly sexist, profoundly heterosexist, and profoundly homophobic. And by my very existence as a transgendered person, those are three very sacred cows in our culture. And my very existence slaughters all three of those sacred cows. And until we as a culture evolve past that, then I foresee that transgendered people to come are going to deal with very similar issues to the ones that I dealt with. And of course it has to do with the individual parents. There are parents today who could raise a transgendered child, or I want to expand not just transgendered children, but one thing I address in my manifesto is anomalous children. Children who are, for whatever reason, not like the other children around them. It takes a phenomenally evolved parent to love and nurture such a child, and at the same time allow them to grow, support them in being who they are, and save them from the shame, the horrible burden of shame that is imposed upon people in our culture who don't fit in box A, B, or C.
We're just different.
Yeah.
You know, with all the science fiction shows of the last couple decades, I keep wondering as we go round and round again and again and again over this or that group of people. And, you know, at the time of this videotaping, there's a big fight beginning in Colorado over the whole issue of making sure that that gays and lesbians relationships can never be recognized as legal marriages. And, you know, wanting to somehow maintain the existence of a subclass. And with all these science fiction shows, I mean, it comes to mind that at whatever point extraterrestrial contact does ensue, it's quite possible it's not going to be a bipolar male-female sort of species, and all of our past prejudices are going to look absolutely petty in comparison to the way you start seeing signs going up all over the place, no ETs served here, and no extraterrestrials wanted, and do you know, and people whispering over in the coffee shops, do you know what they do when they go into their, oh my God. You know, at some point it would be nice if the human race could just grow up and get past it and figure they're doing what's normal to them, and it's not for me to judge it. If in whatever form or way a creature is able to find love and their own understanding of happiness, why not? Who's it hurting? And yet it seems we go round and round and round on the silly carousel, trying to decide who's fit to live. And I just so want to get back to, you know, that wonderful little Dr. Seuss book that was made into an animated movie I saw on television, Horton Hears a Who. And I had no idea I would turn out to be Sister Who at the time. But I love the song at the end of it, as they're finally got over their hump and decided that there really were people living on that dust speck. And they go off into the distance singing, "A person is a person is a person after all."
What a concept.
I long for that day.
I think our culture and many cultures on the face of the planet are evolving in that direction, and I think that's a good sign. With the resurgence of New Age spirituality, which it's funny, it's called New Age spirituality when so much of it is based on religion that predates Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that with New Age spirituality, there's a lot more honor for the individual, where in many manifestations of Western religion, there are prescribed ways to be. You may have life A, B, or C, and don't choose anything else because there are severe punishments if you do. And you know, even within our lifetimes, we saw a very severe, what I call the Ozzie and Harriet mentality, where everyone needed to look like Ozzie and Harriet or they were less than. And even though that still exists, I find that as a culture, and many, many individuals are evolving far beyond that.
And I guess that's where, as Sister Who, occasionally at the beginning, I would have people accuse me of cross-dressing. And, you know, interestingly, it was usually children around the age of 10 who would come up to me and say, "Why are you wearing a woman's dress?" And I said, "I'm not wearing a woman's dress. This is my dress. It has nothing to do with women's clothing or whatever." And in being Sister Who, I understand that for the current language that I use, Sister Who is grammatically female. That's probably the only sense in which Sister Who is female, however. And in most senses, I understand Sister Who as someone who transcends gender. That it's not really about being male or female or any of that. It's about a deeper level of personhood. It's about being able to say a person is a person is a person is a person. And if we can just manage mutual respect and nonviolence, basically everything else is possible.
You know, on my journey, what I've found is that the more I accept and honor and embrace the light that shines from my soul in its uniqueness, the more, or I should say, the less threatened I feel by people who are different than I?
I think it's almost in direct proportion to the extent that people don't know the person inside, that they become more concerned and intimidated by the people who are on the outside. And the more you know yourself, the less you worry about someone else's differences. I like to think of people as being care packages from God, that this divine person or whatever it is that orders the universe and creates harmony and somehow draws us into experiences beyond our five senses, that in each person is like a care package sent to the world with all sorts of unexpected things inside to create the sensitivities and the insights and the aptitudes that the world needs for whatever the world is suffering from. You know, that if there is a generation that struggles with issues of identity around gender and trying to grow beyond this this feeling of being in lockstep with traditional roles, that women do this and men do this and never the twain shall meet. You know, to have people come along, as difficult and as painful as the experience of being transgendered is, to have people come along who are anomalies and say, it needs rethinking. And individually, the person works to create more harmony. Societally, everyone is invited to not be so locked into the roles and to not be so locked into the expectation that physiology precedes identity, rather than identity preceding physiology.
You inspire my spiritual evolution, because just as you were saying that, it occurred to me what an honor it is for me, in spite of the horrors that I must endure, being true to myself, what an honor it is to be a vessel for human evolution.
To be one of humanity's teachers.
And I see each and every one of us as a beacon of light.
This little light of mine. Exactly. I mean, the whole point is I'm going to let it shine. It doesn't even say anything about it except that it's my light.
There's the old...
We're coming down to the very end of the show, I'm afraid.
Okay.
And of course, in half an hour, we're never going to say everything that needs to be said. Yeah. But I thank you for being a guest today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
People ask me who my target audience is, and I say the entire human race, because I would like to think that in the last half hour, everyone on the planet can get something out of what has been shared. Thank you. And thank you for what?